Hi, I'm Pastor Britta, and I preached a sermon this last Sunday on 1 Kings 17, where Elijah raises the widow's son from the dead. And in that sermon, in that time, we talked about death, the reality of death, that death is the first part of the good news of the gospel, that Jesus died, was crucified and dead, and that he then rose again. And that how quickly you and we choose the resurrection part of the gospel, we skip over the death part. And how when God is inviting us to follow him, when Jesus says, come and follow me, Jesus also says, come and die. And so I got a lot of questions from you about death. Really the question, if I can sum them up in one easy, quick one, is why did God allow death? Why does God allow death in our world? And I stated this on Sunday, but in my own growth and understanding of who God is, I've come to believe that God didn't set out to think of death as a good option for population control. He hates it. He hates death. But the greatest gift he gave his children was the gift of free will and the gift then of salvation that came along with it. And so that first gift, the free will gift, means that we are not puppets. And because we're not puppets, we have made decisions that dishonor God, decisions that separate us from God, decisions that cause sin in our world and in our life. And so as a punishment for those sins, God says, your bodies, they will waste away. But then Jesus comes, and Jesus gives us the hope of new bodies, of new birth, of new life. And so the question of death is a hard one. But I know that death hurts God's heart as much, actually more, than it hurts our hearts. God hates death, and he created a solution for death once and for all. That's where I've come to in my understanding of that. And it's not clean, it's not pretty, but it hinges on Jesus Christ. And when I test that with what I read in Scripture, I can be sure that Jesus hurts because of death, that God's heart hurts because of death, and that God is doing new things for us, with us, because he doesn't like the fact that death exists. And then one final question I received: how has your grief brought you closer to God? In all ways. I would say that I know that there is a God. I know of a God who cares. I know of a God who is present. I know of a God who's tender and merciful, because I have walked through grief, because I've watched my family walk through grief. And even in the deep sorrow of death, Jesus, his presence was so intimately close to our family, made known by the church, made known to my family and to me by our church community, and by countless family and friends who dragged us into the presence of Jesus at times. So that has literally brought me closer to Jesus. And as I continue to reflect about grief and loss and death, I keep going back to the faithfulness of God, that faithfulness that I can stake my claim in, because I've seen it so beautifully in the work in my life and in my family's life. And I would invite you, as I said on Sunday, and as these questions come in, to not be afraid of the questions that you need to ask God, to not be afraid of the questions that seem counter Jesus. Because those questions, when you ask them, when you wrestle with them, when you're honest with them, may invite you into a deeper relationship with Jesus. Because it's not all pretty and shiny and new bodies and new life, but you're getting to the death of it. You're getting to the first part of the gospel. And there and only there can you then be raised to new life. So ask those hard questions. Don't be afraid to do it. I've found freedom in asking questions of Jesus, and I pray that you would find that same freedom.